If you're in business, you probably have a website, but can your site handle your growth? How many visitors before your site slows down or crashes? What about storage and data security? From web hosting to virtual servers, Pair Networks provides the online infrastructure you need to start, grow, and flourish. When it comes to security and updates, don't worry, we've got you covered. Our 24/7 US-based customer support is the best in the industry. No frustrating chatbots or sitting on hold for hours. Check out pair.com today to learn more. That's PAIR.com.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
Hey everyone, it's Susan Kaufman, and you are listening to Attitude Magazine's ADHD Experts Audio. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Vincent Menastra. He will be talking about strategies for teaching life skills to children and to teens with ADHD. He'll specifically talk about skills such as those related to communication, how to teach kids to communicate and connect with their peers and with other adults. Confidence, how to help kids master a sport or a skill or an academic area that matters to them and their peers. Strength, how to help kids stop teasing. Empathy, how to develop your kids' natural kindness and appreciation. Organization, devising systems to keep kids organized and working efficiently. Let me just introduce you to Dr. Menastra in case you don't know him. He is the author of a number of very, very highly regarded books on parenting children with ADHD. One has become a classic. It's called Parenting Children with ADHD, 10 Lessons That Medicine Cannot Teach. It's in its second edition now. And a helpful book for professionals. If any of you want to share with your children's pediatricians or other professionals something, he has a book called Unlocking the Potential of Patients with ADHD, just for professionals, and just published. And we're going to hear some of, I'm guessing the material from his new book, which is Teaching Life Skills to Children and Teens with ADHD. He is a clinical psychologist. He's the director of the FPI Attention Disorders Clinic at Endicott, New York, in upstate New York. And he, as I said, has seen tens of thousands of children and adults with ADHD. He's internationally recognized for his research on the neurophysiological characteristics of children with teens with ADHD, and has an interesting focus on both the science and the practical treatment aspects. His studies are demonstrating the really important significance of parenting style, school intervention, nutrition, and other non-medical aspects to helping children with ADHD. So thank you so much, Dr. Menastra, for being with us today.
Thank you so much.
We are so grateful to our sponsors. They allow Attitude to present all the information we do week after week at absolutely no cost to our listeners. And today's sponsor is the American Psychological Association. They have a wonderful publishing arm, which publishes a wealth of resources for the ADHD community, including professional books for practitioners, self-help books for children under the Imagination Press imprint, and adult self-help and parenting books, including Dr. Menastra's most recent book under the APA Life Tools imprint. So please visit www.apa.org/pubs for a full look at all the wonderful resources that they present for our community. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Dr. Menastra with our thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Susan, and I want to thank Attitude Magazine for the invitation. We have much to cover, and this is going to be the beginning of a conversation, because I think that anyone who has any experience in working with children who have attention deficit disorders, and any child that is a teenager or as they become an adult, individuals who continue to have problems in relating to others, this is not something that's going to be, we cover it today's talk, and it's all better. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the presentation, a little bit of an idea about me and what we've been doing at our clinic, and then get into the meat of it. So as far as me, most people will ask me, how'd you get involved in working with kids and adults that have ADHD? Many times people ask if I have ADHD. But the reality is that I got involved in working with kids with ADHD in a roundabout way. I came out as a doc, I started working with kids, and I found myself sitting in clinics with children and teenagers who were having difficulties paying attention in school. They were having difficulties completing their homework. And more than that, they were also having difficulties in figuring out how to become a friend, figuring out how to keep friendships, figuring out how to calm themselves down when they were angry, figuring out how to calm themselves down when they were anxious. They weren't feeling particularly confident, and they weren't feeling particularly liked. And so my initial research was to try to figure out, well, what's going on with these kids? I mean, when you sit with folks and they describe ADHD from a behavioral perspective, that provides us with some information, but it wasn't really helping me understand, well, what's actually causing this? I mean, kids and teenagers who have ADHD have been told what the right thing to do. They've been told what they're supposed to do. But despite being told, and despite all sorts of different kinds of disciplinary strategies, they weren't really getting it. And so that was confusing to me. Unfortunately, as I had studied to be a doc, one of the things that I had learned is I had learned how to use EEG equipment. And at the time, I was learning how to use it for applications in understanding seizure disorders or understanding folks that were having problems sleeping. Well, it took not too big of a leap to realize that I needed to understand what attention looked like neurologically. And so the early part of my research was trying to figure out, well, what's actually going on? What parts of the brain are involved in controlling attention? And are those regions of the brain behaving any differently in folks that have attention problems compared to those that don't? And if they are behaving differently, well, what could be causing that? And what kinds of things can we do to help? We're going to be talking about how to set up the foundation for teaching life skills in your home or in a school or in a clinic, because teaching life skills is an ongoing process. And it's not something that I really think people get a whole lot of headway on when they try to do it on their own, just with their child in a one-on-one setting. So we're going to talk about how to set it up in your community, how to structure some class meetings. We'll talk about some specific exercises to improve certain skills, and Susan was talking about those. And then we're going to talk about how to build an ongoing social group for your child. So in terms of what ADHD is, we can talk about it behaviorally or socially. And behaviorally, we talk about ADHD as a condition that shows up in about 5 to 10% of kids. These children have problems with attention, and they seem to be more distracted than others, and some will be restless or fidgety and impulsive. Socially, kids that have ADHD often struggle to complete their schoolwork, control their emotions, have conversations, organize their stuff, and a variety of other skills. Now, when we talk about problems of attention, one of the things that often gets omitted is that when we anchor on the social and we anchor on the behavioral characteristics of ADHD, we ignore a number of other medical conditions that can be relevant. So when I'm working and evaluating a child for possible ADHD, certainly one of the things that I do is I do ask parents and I do ask teachers and I do ask folks that know the child to give me information through interviews or questionnaires and give me information through completing rating scales. And that can tell me that there are a number of symptoms suggestive of ADHD, but it can't tell me whether those symptoms are being caused by a condition called ADHD, or it's a condition that's due to some of these other medical problems that you see on the slide. The most common condition that mimics ADHD in our region in the Northeast is vitamin D deficiency. About a third of the children that I see at my clinic have an undiagnosed and untreated vitamin D deficiency. And vitamin D deficiencies will cause problems with attention and mood. There are other conditions that you look at that are pretty common. Things like sleep deficits. Children should be getting at least 9-10 hours of sleep, and it's not uncommon for me to see a teenager, for instance, who's up and getting maybe, 7 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep on a night-to-night basis. There's no way that child is going to be able to focus. We also have kids that have visual tracking problems and visual convergence problems. And these are kids who may be having difficulty focusing their attention in school as they're trying to do math, or as they're trying to read, as they're trying to write, simply because their eyes don't lock on what they're looking at and track the information left to right. That occurs in about 20 to 25% of the kids that I see. There are other kinds of conditions that are listed on the screen that happen less frequently. Dietary intake of protein at breakfast and lunch is not one of those. That's a fairly common one. And so for children that I work with, the things that are the basic part of my conversation with parents has to do with examining whether any of the kind of conditions that we're talking about have been evaluated, whether the child is getting sufficient sleep, whether the child is eating sufficient protein. And for an elementary school child, we're talking about 10 grams of protein at breakfast and then also at lunch. We're also talking for teenagers, it's much more like 15 grams to 20 grams. But a child who's not getting the protein that they need is going to be at a real disadvantage to sustain their attention during the day. They're also going to be more likely to be having difficulties falling asleep at night. The other conditions that are down there happen less often, but these all should be evaluated and treated by the child's doctor before we start treatment for ADHD. So the initial process for me is one in which I'm evaluating the child's behaviors and symptoms and getting an estimate of frequency, but I'm not limiting my evaluation to that. I think it's very important to rule out these other medical conditions. If you fail to do that, you can be off to a wild goose chase, tracking down and trying all sorts of different varieties of medications and other interventions without really getting anywhere. The question that we want to talk about today has to do with what is ADHD neurologically, and what does that have to do with kids with ADHD having life skill problems? Well, there are a couple of neurological differences. And as we talk about kids with ADHD, teenagers with ADHD, and neurological differences or genetic differences, I think it's important that we emphasize we're talking about differences. We're not talking about a disease. We're not talking about injury. We're talking about differences in how kids with ADHD, teenagers with ADHD, neurologically are built. So one of the first things is we found that children and teens with ADHD do show slight differences in the size and the functioning of brain regions that are involved in attention, behavioral control, and social judgment and planning. And those regions include the cerebellum, which is the back of the brain, the frontal lobes, and other structures that we listed here. I'll show you some pictures in just a minute. Well, what causes these neurological differences appear to be genetic factors. Now, this has been discussed, and there are ongoing debates about which specific genes and what characteristics of the genes. But some of the more consistent findings have been that kids and teens with ADHD would be suspected to have fewer dopamine receptors in brain regions that are involved in attention and behavioral control, more dopamine reuptake transporters, and similar things happening with norepinephrine receptors. I want to show you what that looks like, as I said. So here's an illustration of the brain. And here we're talking about the prefrontal cortex. That's a region that's going to be involved in noticing and paying attention. Back here in the cerebellum, this is going to be involved more in sequencing, understanding what comes first, what comes second. If I want this, how do I make it happen? And these are two regions where we see differences in size. When we look at the brain cell illustration, we see an area at the bottom that shows up as some differences in kids that have attention deficit disorder and kids that don't. The two characteristics we're talking about is that when we look at the number, the density of receptors, it appears to be that there are children who have ADHD, they have about 1/6 fewer of these dopamine receptors and about 70% more of these reuptake transporters. So when a brain cell releases neurotransmitters, it squirts out across a gap, it activates these receptors, and then some of the neurotransmitters are going to come back in. And what appears to be going on is that this process is altered in the child that has ADHD. Two things happen in kids that have ADHD. Most of the kids show too little activation of the frontal lobes, meaning the part of the brain that has to do this wake up, pay attention, notice what the teacher's saying, notice what your mom and dad is saying, notice what you're thinking, reading about when you're reading in a book. That's not activating. The region of the brain that has to do that isn't activating. These children have problems paying attention because their brains are in a state where they're physically awake but neurologically unaware. On an EEG, it'll look like this. This is relatively slow pulsing signal coming off of the frontal lobe. This type of a signal, when we see it in an individual, and we can see it in anybody, this is not an abnormal profile. when you look at this as a neurologist, you look at this and you go, there's nothing wrong here. This is a child who's just having a period of time when he's producing a lot of activity at about 7, 8 cycles a second. It's fine. Well, what's going on physically and what's going on psychologically in a person who's doing this type of a thing are linked. When the brain is pulsing at these speeds, if you're reading something, you have no idea what you just read. If your mom or dad is talking to you and your brain pulses like this, you have no idea what they said. If you're watching a TV program and your brain's doing this and your mom or dad calls you from the kitchen and asks you to come in, you didn't physically hear them. Now, this isn't an excuse. This is just a reality of what's going on. So the majority of kids who have ADHD, what's going on neurologically is the frontal lobe is not activating as much as it should. Now, there's another group of kids that we see. And these are kids who have overly active brains. And one of the things that parents and teachers have often talked about is they go, some kids with ADHD seem to be always thinking about something. Well, there are kids that have ADHD. It's the minority of kids. It may be 10 to 20%, possibly a little higher, but about 10 to 20% of the kids that have ADHD, what's going on is their brains are overly active. These kids have brains that will activate and they'll notice one thing that'll remind them of something else, and pretty soon they're thinking about tons of stuff that has nothing to do with what they should be focusing on in the first place. What their pulse looks like is this. This is very different. Here we have a pulse of a brain pulsing much more quickly. When I see this type of a pulse in a kid, I know that what's going on is that they are attending or thinking about something, don't know what it is, but they're thinking about something. Now, when we talk about differences, it's usually interesting. A lot of times when there are genetic differences, there are real advantages to it. So the kids that have this underarousal of the frontal lobes, they seem to have inherited what I call the energy saver brain or the smart brain. They may notice something just like everybody else, teacher talking, mom's talking, the book that I'm looking at, I notice it. But unless that material is important, interesting, life-threatening, or fun, their brain will quickly disregard what's in front of them. However, because of the structure of the brain, with a much better dopamine reuptake system, what's going on with them is when they have a situation that's important, interesting, life-threatening, or fun, dopamine and adrenaline pathways that connect us to pleasure and pain regions in our brain are activated. And these kids, when their brains start to activate and respond to pleasure or pain, because they have 70% more dopamine reuptake, they can fire, reload, much faster than other kids. And so when they're involved in a task that's important, interesting, life-threatening, or fun, they will outperform most of the kids that are their peers. Flip it around, if we talk about the kids that have this hyperarousal, these are kids that come up with amazingly, seemingly out-of-the-box solutions to problems, and people go, how did you get to that? And their thinking can be going in pretty unpredictable directions. They're very good at identifying aspects of problems that other people never would have considered. So down the road, these kids have some really good advantages. Unfortunately, having conversations, reading books, doing the things that they have to do in school, they don't really activate the children in a way that's helpful. So the bottom line of this part of our webinar is to help you realize the following. Number one, if you don't understand and treat the underlying physical causes of your child's attention and life skills problems, you're not going to be successful. It doesn't matter what advice, guidance you're given, I don't think you'll be successful. And if we're talking about the child whose underlying neurological causes of their attention difficulties and life skill difficulties is due to ADHD, then there are a variety of different treatments that have been approved by the FDA and have been recognized as helpful that can be used in the treatment of those conditions. For other physical conditions, like we talked about vitamin D deficiencies, we talked about nutritional and sleep problems, we need to take care of that first. So let's talk about how we might want to go about teaching life skills at your home. And you think about any lesson you tried to teach your child. I coach baseball right now, and I wouldn't dream about believing that I would help a child get better at hitting or catching the ball if on a day-to-day basis I was doing nothing to help them learn specifically the skill that we were trying to teach. I can't think of too many skills that we learn where we're not systematically focusing on a lesson plan to teach the skill. So the classes that we run here and the classes that I support and I provide consultation to, I encourage the group to meet once a week. I encourage and basically insist when it's done in my clinic that the child and a parent or guardian is there in order to learn the lesson that's being talked about and kind of support the practice at home. So I jokingly refer to this is the big kid version of play dates. When your children were little, you had them out there, you were going to the playground, and you were trying to teach them the basics of sharing, taking turns, don't be aggressive. You weren't really figuring that they were going to be able to talk much. You weren't figuring that they were going to be able to engage each other in sort of a great interactive game. It was kind of like parallel play, but you were hoping that they would enjoy the company of other kids and that they would learn to share and not be aggressive. And so you would go on play dates. This group, these types of groups, are organized play dates for kids and teenagers. We encourage the groups to focus on one lesson a week. As far as the sources of the lesson plan, it could be one that's found in the book that I've written. John Taylor's written some good books on this topic. And so relying on a source of a lesson plan, basically, you're going to be going, okay, meeting together and saying, what do we want to teach our kids this week? You talk, you decide, somebody serves as the organizer, and you begin to develop a lesson plan for your class. Now, in the class, in the meeting, in the group, the get-together, the play date, whatever you want to call it, it's a combination of things. When I do it at my clinic, we always have a snack or a meal. So either I'll provide pizza or something along those lines, or parents will chip in and they'll bring a meal. And so we'll get together and we'll have a meal or a snack together. And during that time, I'll have the kids and their parents paired up in small groups of maybe 2 kids and 2 parents, and they'll be talking about what they did in the week. What did they do in the week that just passed? What did they try out? After we have that kind of experience conversation, a little bit of snack, a little social conversation, then we get into a teaching of the new lesson. Then we'll play a game that's designed to reinforce the lesson of the week. We'll pair several of the kids to work on those lessons during the week so that when the kids in my groups head out, there's another person that they're going to be working with on the lesson that we talked about together with their parents. So it kind of reminds me of group homework assignments. Now, before you get started in doing the groups, somebody is going to sit down and talk with the kids. And usually the parent will talk with their kids. And what I've written in the next couple of slides, obviously I don't expect you to read, but the gist of it goes like this. I mean, at this point, if you think about how much time you get to spend talking specifically with your child about a life skill that you'd like them to get better at, and you followed up with some kind of a specific lesson plan that you're going to be doing in the week, and then you're going to be practicing that day to day, that doesn't happen too often, at least not in my experience of the kids that come to see me. But a long time ago, we didn't have a bunch of things that entertained us, that we just sat in front. And they're very captivating, they're very engaging, they're very enjoyable, but they don't teach life skills. All joking aside, if you think about how much time your child is spent having their brain entertained compared to having their brain learn some kind of a skill, life skill, that's going to make them feel better about themselves and better about what their future can hold for them, it's going to be, I would guess, largely skewed in the direction of we're engaging as spectators. Now, I don't want to get into the whole discussion of how much video time or how much TV time is good or bad. That's not the focus I want to anchor on. What I kind of want you to think about, is the notion of the children with ADHD are stimulated visually very easily. They will track things that are going on around them. And if something going on around them is interesting, they will look at it. But the thing that's troubling to me about all the time that our children spend watching and being entertained and being spectators is that the TV game, the video game, the television program, or whatever else we're looking for, doesn't involve typically a verbal response. They don't have to say anything. So the child is spending hours and hours, days and weeks worth of time looking, but never getting the region of their brain that has to stimulate, oh, I have to think of something to say right now. That's not being stimulated, and that's a huge problem. So we talk about the importance of learning certain life skills, and there are a variety of ones that as moms or dads, I'm sure you want to teach your children. And the different books that are out there, including mine, have some questionnaires, inventories to help you think about what you'd like to teach. But a good thing for you to do is to consider, what would you like to teach? And then just like when you took your children to a pool to learn how to swim, other kids and parents were there, and the kids learned to swim together. This is learning how to survive on the land with other kids and their parents. Now, what I'd like to emphasize as we go further is that if we're going to teach life skills, hungry, tired kids don't learn very well. And that's true for all of us. So when we talked a little while ago about the goal or the importance of eating protein, getting enough sleep, the first lesson, the first activity that we do in any of my life skills classes is we talk about what the body needs protein for, and we talk about how much sleep and the value of exercise. One of the things we'll do in this class is we'll teach the children what are the foods that can give them protein. Some kids don't know. The slide shows you some of those. So for example, I can get 7 grams of protein out of an ounce of cheese. That's about a nice slice of cheese. An ounce of meat, an ounce of chicken. So if you think about, those types of foods, we try to teach children what an ounce of meat looks like, what an ounce of chicken looks like, so they have an idea. Oh, half a hamburger is about 2 ounces of meat. Oh, okay. So 2 ounces of meat, that's 14 grams of protein. So we try to teach kids about how dairy, they can use peanut butter, a variety of foods. After we teach that lesson, which is a very brief lesson, we'll demonstrate different kinds of exercises that the kids can do in their home. And nothing that's particularly taxing. It's just that it requires continuous movement. And the kids will get a kick out of doing it in the class, watching me or their parents attempt to do one-handed push-ups or some other kind of silly thing. And we talk about how they're going to be able to get 9 hours of sleep a night. Our challenge game would be some sort of a quiz. We'll have the parents sit with their children, and I'll present, or you can present, different foods in pairs. And the question would be, which food has more protein, this or that? Which food has more protein, a bowl of Cheerios or a package of Doritos? And actually, the package of Doritos does, but it's not a healthy food particularly. So the game is something that follows a little bit of discussion, a little bit of instruction, a little bit of demonstration of exercise, and then we roll into a food IQ test. We'll also play any kind of a game. It can be a basketball game where you're crumpling up paper and you're doing a trash can basketball. But we always have the parents and the kids paired up. And so the parent and the kid pair that gets the most baskets in the trash can in 90 seconds wins. And the group that you run can offer whatever kinds of prizes you want to, or none. But we usually have some sort of a prize that the kids get. The kids love that. They love the opportunity to be engaging with their parents in something fun. Because one of the things that's really sad about being a mom or dad of a kid with ADHD is that we have to spend so much time making sure that the kids' homeworks are done and they're not doing stuff that's going to get them into trouble, and making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And we just end in kind of like a mini police force. We don't get time often to kick back and enjoy time with them. So in each of our classes, including this one on eating and sleeping and exercise, we want to make sure that the parents and the kids are teamed up together, and we do a little bit of a food IQ test and then tabletop basketball. Let's talk about building confidence next. Now, this is a big chunk of a skill that we break down in the parts, both in our classes here and in the book that we wrote. The thing that I want to emphasize is that confidence doesn't just come from one source. There are several sources of confidence, and if you think about it, I think they'll come to you pretty clearly. So one of the first things that is a source of confidence is to get good at something that makes your parents look at you with a smile on their face. You want to look good in the eyes of your parents. That's a reality. From the time you were little, you wanted to bring a smile from your face. You wanted to see your parents happy with you. Looking good in the eyes of your parents is an ongoing thing. No matter how old you are, if you don't think you look good in the eyes of your parents, I don't care if you're 40, 50, 60, if you think your parents are down on you and do not approve of you and do not like you, that is going to be an issue for you and it will eat at you. So that's one source. Another source, and we work on this pretty early in the kids in their lives, is facing fears. Facing the fear of not being in the room with your mommy or daddy. Facing the fear of being in a bedroom by yourself. Well, over time, getting that sense of confidence that comes from I faced fears and I survived is a good source of confidence. And we'll talk about that. Trying to get good at something that is valued by kids your own age is a source of confidence. Now, you don't have to be a great basketball player. What matters is that you're willing to get out there and try, to demonstrate that you're not too scared to get out there and work on learning how to dribble a basketball or catch a baseball or whatever else might be important to the kids in your peer group. Having friends is important as a source of confidence. There's nothing that erodes confidence more than the child sitting there and concluding that nobody likes me. It's kind of hard to feel good about yourself and feel confident if you've concluded that. And the last part that I'll mention to you, and this is something that, again, we expand on in a lot of the books and the conversations we have, everybody has a moral code. Everybody develops a sense of right or wrong. Everybody has that feeling. And to the degree that our actions are consistent with what we believe is right, we feel confident. To the degree that our actions do not match our moral code, our sense of what's right or wrong, it erodes our confidence. So in this example of a lesson on confidence building, we talk about, getting good at something that matters to others. So one of the things that we'll do in this class is we'll briefly talk about the importance of confidence and that it comes from different sources. The activity that we have the kids and their parents work on is to sit and just think about skills or activities that they think matters to their peers. They'll do that with their parents. Then we'll have the kids sit with each other and their parents, and they'll talk about what's in the list and begin to think about what they might want to get good at. In our challenge game portion of this, the kids and their parents will be working together on a task to challenge others. A lot of times they'll make paper airplanes or something like that. Sometimes they'll complete a pegboard. We have a variety of different pegboards that parents and the kids can do. They can do them blindfold. It's fun. The kids get a kick out of watching their parents work on something and not being perfect. And we laugh and we enjoy it. And we do it in front of other people. Getting confident has to do in part with I'm brave enough to do something that other people can see and maybe mess up. And that's an important lesson for them. So the homework for this, again, we're pairing up the kids with each other, and we're going to work on a variety of one of the skills at least during the week. Another area that we work on is conversational skills. Now, in terms of thinking about conversations, there are a number of different steps. First off, I need to learn and discover what other kids like to talk about. I mean, when I ask kids, what do kids like to talk about? Most of the kids that I work with ADHD have no clue. In fact, it's pretty sad when I coach baseball teams and when I coach basketball teams and football teams, it amazes me how little spontaneous conversation occurs among children in general. So our first ask is, if we want to develop conversational skills, we need to help our kids figure out what other kids like to talk about, and there are different sources for that. And then the thing that I try to teach the children to do is not to leave home in the morning without at least 3 stories that they think that they could tell about a topic that might be of interest. So in our group activities, one of the things we joke with the kids about, our first activity usually has to do with a demonstration of how pathetic going up to someone and saying, "What's up?" or "What's new?" Now, you're out there listening to me. If I said to you right now, hey, what's up? What's up? What comes to your mind? What's up? Well, I don't know about you, but to me, I've got nothing stored in my language memory bank in the what's up category. So I get a blank. So one of the reasons for tossing out something that you've heard or seen, something that you think might be an interest or group, is if I practice bringing up something that I saw or heard or did, if I practice tossing that out in a conversation, and I have a couple of other stories in the back of my mind, there's a pretty good chance that I'm going to make some headway in a conversation. So going into the group activities for a conversation skills class, first, we'll do a generate a list of topics that interest each child. So the parent and the child will sit down, and the parent and the kid will come up with a list of what do you like to talk about, and everybody else in the class will do the same. Then we'll play a group game in which I'll pick, or you can pick, one interest that's unique to that child. We'll have the child stand in front of the room. I'll mention, I'll give the list, and each of the kids in the group will try to guess which one of those interests is unique to that child. We'll do that for all the kids. And then when they have an idea what the kids like to talk about, then we'll do some practices, some demonstrations, some role plays, if you have it, pretending that we're starting up a conversation on the bus, pretending we're having a conversation in a hallway, cafeteria, and recess. We'll also do a fair amount of encouraging the family and other kids in the groups to play games like categories or outbursts. These are all games where you have to generate language on a category. Our challenge game, we will do something like that. I'll often have everybody sit around, the kids and their parents together. I'll pick a food. I'll say, okay, I want you to give me a list of as many foods and drinks that you can think of that begin with the letter M. And the kids will start feverishly writing down. The parents will feverishly write down. If the kid can't write, the parent will be the scribe. We try to come up with as many foods or drinks as they can in 90 seconds, and the family with the most wins the prize. Again, homework, we're pairing up the kids to practice conversation starters during the week. Teasing is another aspect of our life skills group that's pretty important. And again, this is just a sample of a lesson plan. So one of the things that we teach our kids in our classes is that teasing is a way that kids try to figure out who's the most powerful, who's the king of the hill, through words. Now, what we first try to demonstrate to the kids in this class is we try to have them experiment and feel out what teasing back does. So we'll do a demonstration in which a child teases another child. But instead of saying nothing, the child teases back, calls them a name back or whatever. And fairly quickly, the group can see that's going to go nowhere. There are two problems in trying to teach a kid with ADHD to come back with a quick verbal response. Number one, a kid with ADHD is operating with a brain that isn't particularly good at working memory when it comes to words. So usually when a kid with ADHD tries to tease back, they get quickly frustrated and they get angry, and they're more likely to strike out physically. So what we try to teach kids is that you can diffuse teasing by accepting the truth about what you're being teased on and then moving on. So, for example, I'm a bald guy who happens to have a ponytail in the back. Now, when I've gone, I'll never forget going by a schoolyard one day, and there were kids hanging out from the windows on the top of the school. And one of the kids calls out and he goes, "Hey, Baldy, what happened to the hair on the top of your head?" And I looked up and I touched the top of my head and I go, "Oh man, it's gone." Then I reached for my ponytail. I said, No, it's still there. I'm in good shape. Thanks. Now, I didn't get crushed by the reality of the truth that I'm bald. I went with it. Now, most kids might not be even quick enough to jokingly do what I did initially. Let's say a kid gets a bad grade on a test and they're looking at their test and other kids see that they got a 40 on a math test and they go, "You are a moron. You are an idiot." Is that the truth? Or is the truth, no, I'm not particularly good in math? So what would be a comeback to being told you're a moron? I could look at the kid and I could say, you're right, I'm not particularly good in math. And then I move on. I need to develop a face. I need to develop the confidence, the understanding that I am good at certain things so that when somebody points out to me a flaw in me, I can accept that and not be crushed and to acknowledge the truth of it. If somebody teases you about something that's true, what is the harm to acknowledging, yeah, if you happen to be a little overweight and somebody says, man, you're fat, I guess I could be crushed. But if I feel decent enough about myself and somebody calls me fat, I could go, yeah, I guess I do need to lose a little bit of weight. Thanks for mentioning. Or whatever I want to say. But what I need to do is I need to deal with the truth about what's just been said to me in a way that says, I understand I'm not perfect. Yeah, there's some truth to what you just said, but I don't want to play the tease game. And then I move away and I move on to a group of kids that I hang with, and that's what I do. So the activity in this class is we do have the kids brainstorm about the top 5 insults or teases that are occurring in their classes. Then we practice handling that exact skill that we talked about in the class. When we move to the challenge game, we're picking one insult or tease, and all the kids and their parents write down as many non-aggressive comebacks as they can in a minute. Again, homework is preparing the kids to talk about, to text each other, to comment with each other about the tease of the day and how they handled it. Teaching organization. I think that when we talk about organization, there are 2 parts that we really get into. One is the organization of the time in your stuff. The other has to do with thinking about a goal that you really want to achieve. So in this class, what we do is we talk about what the family would like their stuff and where they'd like their stuff to go. So they and their parents come up with a worksheet of where stuff is supposed to go. And that's something that most people have known and understood for a long time. But the second most important thing that we do in this class is we decide on when it's supposed to get done, when it's supposed to be there. Because as kids that I work with at work, the basic rule is I'll do it later. And the operational definition of the word later is anytime, not now. So the kids with ADHD, I'll do it later means I'll do it sometime undetermined, but not now. And so with their parents, what we do is we talk about when it is that it needs to be done. Parents are usually going to need to demonstrate that and have a clean up, organized day where they get things squared away. And then before they're able to do any kind of fun, any kind of enjoyment or whatever, they need to have done what it was that needed to be accomplished, whether it be getting their bed squared away, getting their books squared away, getting their food squared away, their toys squared away. In my world, until that stuff is done, the child doesn't have the okay to play or do anything else. And that's where we get into things like positive punishment and practice, which is basically you didn't do it right, so now you're going to have to practice cleaning up your room. And you're going to have to do something to make up for the fact you didn't keep your word, and you move on with that. Last one I'll talk about briefly today is the notion of kindness. And we talk about in our classes and we work with our classes to begin to pair up and to work as a group on some sort of a community, some sort of a local need or a need that they learned about around the world. And they begin to work on how do we go about the business of getting involved in helping. Our life skills classes are involved in those types of actions on a week-to-week basis. Once we get to this point in our classes and we begin to do that, this is a variation of what other kinds of groups, social groups do, but it's kids that have ADHD and their parents working together. So again, these are some of the lessons that we talk about. And in terms of launching a group, as I said, there are different books that you can use. There are certainly consultations with specialists like myself that you can lock on with and connect with us on webinars, phone consultation, or other kinds of presentations. You can also get it started with physicians and others in your community. So we can start to answer some questions. I apologize if I went on too long, just certain things I wanted to try and cover, and hopefully it was helpful. So let's take some few questions and begin to have a little bit of a conversation. Can we do that, Susan?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Mesh. That was fascinating. there are a number of really interesting parenting-related questions I'd like to focus on here. But first, let me just step back to the beginning of your presentation, because there are some questions related to the very interesting idea that before addressing ADHD, you should rule out other conditions. So, for example, one person asks whether blood tests identify vitamin mineral deficiencies. Is that something that you check for via your child's annual physical? How should they go about addressing those possible deficiencies?
Well, one of the things that I'd say is that yes, they can be, and they are determined largely through blood samples. And when a person comes to our clinic, what happens is they complete an evaluation that includes the type of things that are traditionally done. But there's one other thing that we do, and that is we perform a quantitative EEG, and that's the pictures of the brain pulse that I was showing you. Now, when I see an abnormal frequency of slow EEG activity, and that's what we developed our tests for, our EEG-based tests for, to identify that. Once I have an atypical finding, then I know I'm dealing with something medical. And once I have that, then I send a letter to the child's doctor and I say, look, seen this child, here's the performance on tests of attention, here's what the ratings are looking like, but I have an abnormal EEG, which tells me that I'm dealing with something that is medically based. I give them a list of the possible sources that could be causing this, and I ask for a specific blood draw for that to be evaluated. Now, when we first started talking, some of the physicians were a little bit reluctant to do that because they would say, look, lab tests are not indicated for use in the diagnosis of ADHD. And I said, that's very true. There are no labs that we say, oh, do this and it means I have ADHD. Even the EEG testing that we were involved in developing and are involved in developing, even that test tells me that something's medical going on, but it doesn't tell me that the child has ADHD. Just tells me that there's some medical condition that's causing an abnormal EEG pulse. And so having said that, and sharing that with doctors, I said, look, I'm just looking for you to evaluate this child for other medical causes of attention and memory problems. And then they go, okay, got it. And so there we got into the doing lab tests. Routine blood physicals. One of the pet peeves that I have with my colleagues is that simply asking someone, a patient, if their child's been ever diagnosed with fill-in-the-blank condition is not the same as making sure the child does not have that condition. The 33% of the patients that I evaluate that have vitamin D deficiencies had been seen by their pediatricians and family care providers for years. And that would never be tested in a routine evaluation, even if a routine CBC was done, because a vitamin D screening is not part of that. Neither is a routine screening for common food allergies part of that. So the listing that I provided to the folks that are on the webinar with us is essentially designed to give the physician some areas to look for. So it wouldn't be part of a routine physical, and it would be something that I definitely would encourage people to do as part of their evaluation of either A, how they want to treat the child's attention problems, or B, if the child's attention problems are not responding to typical medications, what else might be going on? And this is a what else might be going on question, the way we can answer it. Okay?
I think that's extremely interesting, and it's something that we need to stress more here at Attitude, where so many people's kids have not had these basic tests done. Dr. Sandy Newmark, who's also on our advisory panel, also stresses strongly having your child screened for a variety of deficiencies. So I think that's really a helpful answer. Thank you. In terms of parenting, there are a number of parents of teens, and they are wondering, they say their teens are too old to be in a group, they're resistant to the idea of social skills, and they're reluctant to engage in conversation. What's your thinking on teens? I think that many of them really, as much as any kid, really needs help with social issues.
Sure. And this is where some of the networking and the building of a social skills group that isn't going to be called a social skills group, this is going to be me and Mr. and Mrs. Johnson and Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, and we're going to get together with them and their kids, and we're just going to hang out. We're going to have some fun, and we're going to talk about, some real stuff. I mean, I guess we could get together and play, foosball or other kind of games, but I don't think that's the only thing we could do. So we're going to start getting together. I'd like to get together with us. We're going to go over to your friend Bobby or Billy's or whatever, and we begin to build times for families to get together in which it's not just nonsense. And so looking at the models that I was presenting today, I asked people to think, do you have friends? Do you have people that you're connected with that have kids that have ADHD? Are there other kids that have ADHD that maybe your kid's not a friend of, but you could get connected with them, not necessarily in a formal way, but informally by working with a school counselor or psychologist, working with a pediatrician to begin to get an idea of how you could talk to or make it known that you'd like to get together and form a kind of a life skills group or a meeting or activity. These are things that don't have to be, we're going to Dr. Menastra's clinic or we're going to Dr. McGillicuddy's clinic, although it can. It can be something that you do if you have a couple of friends or a couple of people who have kids with ADHD and you can begin to network with it. That being said, where you might have some friends that you could connect with, you might have some other people in your community that have a teenager with ADHD having similar problems, and you begin to develop a social relationship with their parents. It might happen that way. It might happen if we're going to go a clinic route and work with the doctor who's treating your child for ADHD, and perhaps that doctor recognizes the need for life skills and might be supportive of a get-together with teenagers in their practice that have this condition, or at least allowing people or asking people if they're comfortable learning about or being contacted by someone who's coordinating those types of groups. So sometimes the primary care physician can engender it. The net out of all that I'm saying is that, sure, sometimes it'll be a counselor that's going to be the trigger person and leading it. Sometimes it might be a parent. Sometimes it might be a school counselor. Sometimes it might be the pediatrician helping to stimulate the development of a small group of their patients. Regardless of how it goes, those meetings need to be fun. Those meetings need to have some food. Those meetings need to have some entertainment factor. Those meetings need to have an opportunity to win something, even if it be a $15, gift certificate to a movie theater, fill in the blank. If it's not fun, if it's not interesting, if it's not something that grabs the kids and they go, yeah, this was pretty cool, then the kid will fade from it. So I think that if it's not dreadfully boring, if it is fun, if it's led by people who have a sense of humor, and I tend to think that I have a pretty good sense of humor, if it's led by someone like that can make it fun and interesting, it'll take off and the kid won't be resistant. And all you have to do is say to the child, I'd like you to go to three of these get-togethers, and after the third one, if we think it sucks, then we'll stop. But if we're having fun and we're enjoying it and we're having a good time with these people and we're maybe learning some stuff, then we're good. But I asked them to commit to 3 times.
That seems like a great model, yeah. And I love the food suggestion, right? Always have food.
Gotta be food. Gotta be food. Gotta be games. Gotta be food. Gotta be games. And it's gotta be fun.
Yeah. So Katie, who is a teacher, is listening in on the webinar, and she says that I currently run an after-school ADHD social skills group at my clinic. Oh, maybe she's not a teacher. Sorry, Katie. In any event, and the children are struggling with emotional regulations surrounding instances of winning or losing. Do you have any suggestions? Yeah. It's very prevalent among the kids that are in my social skills group. I guess, really melting down when they lose is what I'm guessing she's saying, right?
I'm curious. Well, I don't know if she could respond to it, but let's take it 2 ways. One of the things that can happen, if you have very low confidence and there is nothing in your life that you feel I'm good at, and you don't feel like you have friends and you don't feel like you have the sources of confidence that can help a person withstand losing, then you're going to continue to melt down. Now, there are certain medical things that they can check out. There's certainly the notion of making sure the child is eating and sleeping. That we can do, okay? There are certain things that can be done at home if the child melts down. For example, again, not to refer to other books or other things that we've written, but in the parenting book that I've written, the whole theme of emotional regulation, and in the life skills group, there's a whole class series that we work on emotional control, overcoming anger. And so if we're talking about kids that have a hard time with losing, my first question is, how bad is their self-esteem and self-confidence if they can't handle losing even a simple little game? And B, what have they been taught to do when they feel frustrated? So with the kids that are having problems and losing, I'd look at what are the sources of self-confidence and work on building that. 2, what's the model that they're being taught? What's a person supposed to do when they lose? I mean, they might not have ever seen a model for what am I supposed to do? I don't feel good about myself. I'm frustrated, so here I go. The third thing is that the region of the brain that controls emotional control, that controls this emotional reaction, in the child with ADHD is not sufficiently activating. The brakes are not being applied as they need to. So that might be a red flag for the need to revisit. Is the medication what it should be? Is our physical treatment of the ADHD what it should be? So those are some things that come to my mind as far as a response to that question.
That's a great question. Number of questions about how to set up these groups. And I'm going to guess, given the time we have, and that reading your recently published book, Dr. Manastra, on teaching life skills might be helpful to anyone who's seriously considering trying to set up a social skills group, whether it be at school or in a professional setting. So
I think
that book
one of the things
is just published. Go ahead. And I just want to make sure everyone knows about it. Teaching Life Skills, published by the American Psychological Association. It sounds like a great resource for this very issue.
There are 2 things that I would say, because I know the time is running short. What I'd say is this. I think, and maybe it's true for others, but I think one of the things that I'm trying to support is the development of these kinds of groups. I'm not interested in helping people go to a 10-week program believing that at the end of the 10 weeks everything's going to be fine. No, we're talking about building a social network. And so I like to offer my services as a consultant to people that are doing it. Sometimes people will just email me questions, and I believe on the webinar there folks have my email address. They can email me. That's one of the easiest ways to do that. You can email me a question. You can email me a concern that you have. Sometimes I can respond to it immediately just in an email response. Sometimes we might decide, okay, let's go online. We'll do a webinar and we'll talk about how to help launch your group. But these are all things that we can do now. It's so easy to do that. So I don't want the folks that are listening feel that they're going to read a book and then everything's fine. Reading a book gives you some lesson plans. Having someone who does this on an ongoing basis in your pocket, in your corner, helping to guide the development of the group is invaluable. So whether it's me, someone else.
Sense. Again, the whole concept that this is an ongoing life skills, building in life skills conversations, constantly makes a huge amount of sense, I think, for all of us. So very regretfully, we are out of time. It's a fascinating discussion. I want to thank you so much, and to thank the American Psychological Association for their support of this webinar, and for all of you for taking part in all of the Attitude webinars. Thank you so much, Dr. Manastra. Signing off.
You got it.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.
When Cynthia came to TurboTax, she had just launched her new side gig, a true crime podcast.
I'm a first-rate detective with a golden voice.
As her TurboTax expert, I made her second income count by guaranteeing 100% accurate filing and her maximum refund.
What did she do with that refund? Find out next week.
Switch to Intuit TurboTax and make your moves count. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Experts only available with TurboTax Live.